My name is Shez Iqbal. Been in the industry for decades, and I'm so happy to be included in this series, The PPA Presents I Found Myself in Publishing. I found myself in publishing with the award-winning Maliha Shoaib, Vogue Business Reporter.
Yes.
That's right?
That is right, yeah.
Good. Almost felt like I got that wrong. It's a good start, right?
Yeah, off to a good start.
Okay, great. Okay. So the award-winning part, we're going to dive into a little bit later.
Mhm.
Yeah, but perhaps you can introduce yourself a little bit better than what I did.
Yes, sure. So I'm Maliha. I'm a reporter at Vogue Business. And what that means is I write stories, to put it very simply. So my stories are kind of split between really simple news stories. Like, for instance, yesterday I wrote a story about the company that owns Louis Vuitton, which is called LVMH, has just signed a deal with Formula One. So it was just a really simple news story, got that out there. That's about sort of like 30 to 40% of the time. And the other times I'm writing bigger features about basically anything that I want. We get a lot of freedom, but typically my stories skew towards topics related to emerging talent or related to diversity, inclusion, sustainability and social impact and those sorts of things.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really great. I enjoy it.
I feel really bad about the fact that I haven't read your content.
That's okay. It's all behind a paywall.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, of course, we're meeting because of the introduction that I got into the PPA Next Gen board.
Yes.
Fantastic board. Really, really just great, smart people, including yourself. Can you talk to me a little bit about the PPA Next Gen board and why you think it was set up?
So the board, we joined, I think it was over a year ago now. The position ends at the end of this year, but myself and a few others have decided to stay on a little bit longer to kind of mentor the next cohort and make that transition a little bit smoother. But essentially the board was set up, I think, to amplify the voices of younger and more diverse talent in an industry where that isn't really seen. Publishing can be quite an elitist industry. It has been up until now, and I think that's something that the PPA is really trying to change. I think that's a really big part of why they're doing this whole campaign around I Found Myself in Publishing. So my role on the Next Gen board is I'm part of the talent committee. So we're tasked with, once you've seen this campaign around I Found Myself in Publishing, what do you do? You've decided you potentially want to work in the publishing industry. How do you get in? What do you need to know? What is like the jargon that you need to understand to even apply to a role? How do you write a CV? And all these different things. So we helped populate a microsite which tells people all that information. And along with that, we've also been developing some guidelines for publishers to make sure that their hiring practices are really inclusive. Because we can't have all these people saying, okay, I think I'm about to find myself in publishing, but just not be received well.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
How have those initiatives been received by the big publishing houses? Or not just the big publishing houses, sorry, I should say all the members.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been pretty good reception so far. We just launched the hiring practices. I think we're calling it the PPA Good Hiring Code, I believe. Okay. You can cut that out if it's incorrect. But I think there's already a few people who have signed on and agreed to pledge to these inclusive practices that we're kind of saying are the right way to do things. So yeah, I think it's been pretty well received. I think that talent and the next generation of publishing professionals, that is a topic that is on every CEO's mind right now. Like it's super important right now. I think particularly post-COVID and post the Great Resignation and all these different, quiet quitting and all these workplace trends where young people have kind of been a little bit disengaged from the working world. I think that it's something that is on people's minds.
Okay, that's great. It's great to hear that it's been received really, really well.
Yeah.
So I introduced you as the award-winning.
Yes. So no one's ever done that before, by the way. So I think I might have to put that somewhere on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. We'll just change your title, right?
Award-winning
the award-winning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great little title to have in there.
Yeah.
So talk to us about the award-winning component, because I found your route into the industry fascinating.
Right. I didn't necessarily find myself in publishing. I very intentionally placed myself there. But yeah, so I knew I wanted to be a journalist from sort of the age of about like 17, 18, right at the end of school. And I joined university and set up a fashion column in our student newspaper and eventually worked my way up to editor-in-chief. And I was like, great, I've got this sorted. And then COVID hit and I couldn't find an internship really, or the work experience I had was cut because it was going to be in person. So I was just really scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. I'm in third year and I have no internship experience and I really want to go into this super competitive industry. So I was applying to everything, from Bloomberg to Cosmopolitan really, and getting rejected from everything as well. And then I found this competition that a little publication called Vogue was hosting, Vogue Business to be more specific. So Vogue Business essentially writes about the business side of the fashion industry. So it's a little bit more analytical than British Vogue, for instance. But I ended up applying and ended up winning. So the prize was you do a 1-month internship with the team. You receive 6 months worth of mentorship, and your story that you submitted goes up online. So mine was about inclusive makeup shades, basically. So I did that. That internship summer after I finished third year. So it was like 2 weeks after I submitted my dissertation, and then kind of that was it from there. So I've stayed on ever since.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of been picture perfect. Really, like very lucky at kind of right place, right time. I think around 2020, people were doing a lot of talent initiatives and offering remote work experience and that sort of thing. So it was a really interesting time to enter the industry.
It's been like a movie, like that. That story is just enter the competition, the competition rather, sorry. And then
with no prior experience, not really any connections, and especially fashion is also there's a lot of nepotism, there's a lot of, it's very competitive and also very elitist. And then publishing, it's also that. So it's, it's been very lucky.
You mentioned the elitist part of the industry a couple of times.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about that.
There is a huge underrepresentation of marginalized groups. So people of color, people who don't come from a particular background where maybe their parents worked in publishing or they have some other connection, people who don't live in London or who aren't from London, all those different things. And I think that it's getting better now. I think that still the people who are in publishing who represent some sort of underrepresented group might still have a degree of privilege, like I definitely do. But I think we're working to change that. So
the landscape feels a little bit warmer, a little bit more friendlier than...
I think it's getting a lot better. I think that probably if I'd been coming up 30 years ago into this industry, it would have been significantly harder.
Okay. And what do you attest that to?
To not really having a connection with the industry, not being from London, and just, I mean, I have, I definitely have some privilege, in my education and that sort of thing. But yeah, when you don't have a connection or know a way in, it's very difficult. And also if you're not from London.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you've landed your dream job.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wrote it out, you're going to have this
Manifesting.
job. Manifesting. Yeah. Exactly. So over those 3 years, what have been your key milestones and achievements?
Great question. Is this just an opportunity for everyone to talk about how great they are? It's a very smart question to put in there. People love to talk about themselves. I think that probably one of my favorite parts of my job is actually doing public speaking. So podcasts like this. I was on a podcast with Kering, which is the company that owns Gucci and Saint Laurent and a few other large companies. And that was a real career highlight. And then in terms of the stories that I've written, probably my favorite piece that I've worked on is this series called Debunking the Dream. We did part 1 last year and part 2 this year. Part 2 just came out at the start of October, so definitely give it a read if it's of interest. But essentially, Debunking the Dream looks at, you've got this dream job, now what? So we kind of looked at what it takes to reach a certain level of success within fashion specifically, and then what it takes to stay happy at that level. So it went into everything from burnout culture to the sort of lifestyle that fashion requires to discrimination and sort of the glass ceiling and how that impacts your success and job satisfaction. So it was a really, really interesting story to look at because we also surveyed 700 people working within fashion. So we had a huge pool of data to draw on. And I worked on that series with my colleague Bella Webb, who's our sustainability editor. And it was just really nice working with someone as well. I think writing can be quite a solitary task. And yeah, we literally every single sentence crafted together. So it was really collaborative and definitely my favorite thing that I've worked on. The series that came out this year looks specifically at fashion designers and the pipeline to their sort of dream career and how that's not necessarily setting them up for success.
In what way?
There's been a lot of changes to the designer ecosystem. So the sort of wholesale landscape has changed. So retailers like Matches Fashion have closed down. There's big question marks around, Farfetch and Net-a-Porter. And, there's things like the cost of living crisis, huge inflation. For British designers, Brexit has been really challenging in terms of shipping materials and things back and forth between Europe and the UK. So it's meant that a lot of independent brands have actually shut down or are really struggling. And then at the top end, we're also seeing this sort of revolving door of creative directors. So that position just keeps changing, and there's not necessarily job security even once you reach the top. So the series kind of looks at how do you build a better system of support. So we go into everything from this sort of star designer trope and how we have this creative director role on a pedestal and how to potentially take it off the pedestal and recognize people working behind the scenes a little bit more. And then we also go into the ways to improve, things like talent incubation schemes and fashion prizes, and what those support schemes kind of incentivize. And then we also look at how you can run an independent brand successfully today.
It does sound interesting.
Yeah.
I can understand why that would be a key achievement. That's a great two-part piece.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not all roses.
No, of course not.
What are some of the challenges that you faced in your career so far?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that probably because I did start out as an intern, I started out in this 1 month, contract, and then I managed to extend that for another 3. And then I managed to get the job. So I feel like at every stage of that first, year, there's 6 months, I was trying to prove myself and prove, look, I can do it and I can do this job really well, please hire me. And I think that I've kind of carried that mindset a little bit throughout the following years. I think that this feeling to like need to prove yourself and therefore potentially taking a little bit more work or not like really struggling to say no to things. And a lot of that is internal. I think also things are pretty fast-paced in any journalism job, but our team's usually pretty good at being like, hey, do you have capacity to write this story? And I'm always like, yes, absolutely, I'll write it immediately. I'll have it done and I'll, give you an apple on your table and like, please love me, So I think that that was probably one challenge. I think also like learning how to fail, to be honest. I think when you've grown up kind of being like the good kid, like I'm really studious and did really well at school and then got this job straight out of uni and it was all like everything was perfect. And I think that at times when, my story hasn't gone quite as well as I wanted it to, it's quite difficult. There was one instance where I had chosen a topic that was quite controversial and was quite critical of one company specifically, when most of our stories tend to be a little bit more industry focused. And so I was tasked with writing this story and was doing it in quite a quick turnaround period, like about 3 days or so. And I think that probably my reporting wasn't as thorough as it should have been. So we ended up not publishing that story. And I really took it not very well, to be honest. I mean, there were a number of reasons why it was sort of killed. It wasn't all just my fault, but I felt really disappointed with myself and like I'd really like let down our readers because it was an important topic that I really cared about and no one else was really writing about it. But I think I had to kind of learn to be okay with not being perfect all the time. And that was really hard.
It does sound like quite a tough thing to get your head around though, right? If you spent 3 days on a topic that you're really passionate about and you feel like this article should get the eyeballs.
Yeah.
And you hear that it's not being published.
Yeah.
That's understandable. It's understandable that you would take that personally.
Yeah. I mean, there was also the element of like, am I a bad journalist now, right? And when you pride yourself on being someone who works hard and, is a thorough journalist, then be like, oh, actually the reporting wasn't quite thorough enough to go ahead with this story. That's really hard to grapple with. But really all you can do when you come out of that is just do it better next time. And I think it's been such a learning experience and I haven't made the same mistake again. So yeah, I think that's just life though, right?
What was the feedback like from your peers and your colleagues when you had this experience?
I mean, obviously I had the feedback that the reporting wasn't quite where it needed to be. So that was one element to deal with. But then when I kind of expressed that I was a bit upset about it, people were really kind about it and saying, it wasn't totally your fault. There was like sort of infrastructure around it. It was a kind of story that I'd never written before and there wasn't very much mentorship or support on how to do that. So people weren't totally blaming me and it felt a lot better once I'd spoken to people about that.
Do you feel like the industry is set up for people to fail forward?
What do you mean by fail forward?
Like learning from your failures. So as opposed to failing and then, that being the end of that subject matter. failing and organizations allowing you to fail or even pushing you to fail. So, so you've got that continuous personal development.
I'm not sure if it's accurate to say like the industry's set up for that to just be like totally fine. I think it really depends on your company. It depends on your managers and the people around you. I think that the industry is really fast paced right now and things are really competitive and it can feel like you have to get everything perfect all the time immediately. And I think that sort of like go rush energy makes you sometimes feel like you can't fail forward. You can't even really fail at all. But yeah, I also think that publishing, or particularly journalism, does kind of attract that very like slightly type A, like studious personality type of someone like me who maybe you're not super comfortable with failing because it's something that you've tried to avoid your whole life. The sort of perfectionist trope.
So what would you say makes publishing a great industry to work in?
It's just so intellectually stimulating, but it's equal parts intellectually stimulating and also socially stimulating. I think that I wanted a job that really required me to use my brain and think and learn, but also had an element of glamour and, some interesting topics I could write about, maybe some interesting events. It has like kind of both sides. So it feels like a really well-balanced career, at least for me. Yeah, from a journalist perspective, being able to basically think of any topic that you're interested in writing and then going and talking to people who know way more about it than you do and then just writing it up and that's your whole job. It's kind of the dream. It's really, it's really fulfilling.
Yeah, it feels like a really fulfilling role.
It is, yeah. And there's still, I love the social element as well, right? Always talking to people, always meeting new people, learning from them. And yeah, it's kind of nice being in the backseat and being able to interview other people actually and hearing about them.
Yeah, how is this feeling, being interviewed as opposed to interviewing people?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you very much. It wasn't the question I was asking, but do you enjoy being under spotlight, the public speaking component, the ability to lead a conversation and sort of take charge on a subject matter?
I do now. I haven't always. I think when I was a really shy kid, like I would hide under the desk in music class when they asked me to sing, or like I was just super, super shy and never wanted to be involved in the school play, like that kind of thing. And when I joined Vogue Business, I saw that anyone important was doing public speaking. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get over this. So I kind of just pushed myself to start doing it. I started telling people, I'm going to start doing public speaking, and then eventually managed to get a few opportunities. The first ones were kind of easier. It was just talking about like my career path, talking about how to get into journalism, that kind of thing. And then eventually, the topics got a little bit more challenging. Like I would talk about human rights and supply chain, not an easy topic to talk about.
No.
But through that, actually, Vogue Business offered me some public speaking training, which was really, really great. I learned that I talk too fast. I probably still am. And yeah, just having a bit of that understanding of how to pace a conversation, how to make sure that everyone in the panel is involved. It's quite nice. I think actually the moderating side of it is sometimes more difficult than being the person answering the questions, because you have to be so switched on and make sure that every topic that you want to talk about is covered, especially when there's multiple people who all have different opinions. Whereas this is very easy. I'm just telling you about my experiences.
Yeah, I haven't got multiple personalities to handle here, so yeah, no. this is a lot easier for me as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go a little bit more sort of forward thinking then. So, what do you see as the current trends in the industry?
I mean, we've touched on it a little bit already, but the pace of the industry is just getting so much faster. I think that if you compare publishing now to where it was a few decades ago, before digital journalism was really the main thing that everyone's doing, it's totally different, right? Even with something like a news story, getting the exclusive, which means that you're the first one to cover it, really publishing like 2 minutes later can make or break you. It's really like,
wow.
Yeah, once something's out there on the internet, anyone can pick it up. So that's competition between publications, and then there's also just the competition with social media, right? If you are a journalist and you're trying to tell a story, then you're also potentially competing with influencers or content creators who are telling it from their perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of changes to the industry related to the internet, really, and now entering sort of the Web3 phase, there's going to be even more, I think.
There is something in there, because as a member of the PPA Next Gen board and also a member of the PPA and various other sort of industry events, you're networking a lot with what I would describe as partly your competition. Do you ever compare notes? Do you ever sort of pick up any insight or tips and tricks from each other?
I mean, it's interesting actually, because so for Vogue Business specifically, there aren't too many direct competitors. There's probably like 2 or 3 publications that cover the same sort of fashion business angle. So yeah, there's not too many of us doing these specific kinds of topics. I think that it is still, I don't know, it's interesting because you'll have these relationships with people working at other publishers, potentially even your main competitor, which are great, and you know, you can be totally friendly and hang out with each other. But people still aren't going to like give you all their scoops, you know, obviously. Yeah, I think that something like the PPA, where people are coming together to discuss these big industry topics that are really affecting everyone at the sort of pre-competitive stage, you know, something like using AI or talent acquisition, like those kinds of topics. I think it really benefits people to be able to share solutions.
So it's more on the high level sharing, so sort of big components, as you say, like sustainability, talent acquisition.
Yeah. Like if I find out who the next creative director of Chanel is, which everyone's talking about right now, I'm probably not going to go tell my competitor, right? but yeah, those topics, absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about, and you touched upon it already, the impact of technology. So is it about the fast-paced component, or is there, you know, perhaps there's something in there about AI, because of course a lot of people are talking about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously when I came into the industry, the digital revolution was well underway, right? So the thing that's now kind of playing on my mind is this whole ChatGPT AI conversation. I actually used ChatGPT for the first time yesterday. Wow. Let me tell you about my experience. So it was really interesting. I was writing this story about, it was kind of just like a fun trend piece around one-legged trousers. Was that something you'd be interested in?
No, no, I don't understand. So you just put a trouser on one leg?
No, so it's a trouser where it would essentially be kind of like a short on one leg and then a trouser on the other.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a fun trend story, and I wanted to include a bunch of puns in it. So I asked ChatGPT to come up with as many sort of idioms, phrases, and puns related to legs as possible, and add it into my copy that I'd already written. And it just wasn't good. To be honest, no, it felt a bit clunky, a bit cheesy, kind of like dad joke-esque, but not in a good way.
Sounds like I'd love them.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. So I feel like that's the only time I've used it so far. I know that some people, they've started to use it for like idea generation, which is probably a little bit better than actually using it for copy. But yeah, I think it's really interesting figuring out where the balance is. Like, how do we tap into these technologies so that we're not going to be behind, but not sort of disrupt the quality of our journalism, which is something that basically all the PPA members kind of pride themselves on. I don't think it's something that we figured out the answer to yet, but yeah, it's going to be really difficult, because even when you use Google now, if you search anything that you really want to find, it'll pull up an AI list that pulls from all the publishers' information rather than directing you to their websites. So yeah, it's a really big problem for our industry right now. I think that with that though, it's not all doom and gloom. I think there's a lot of opportunities for great innovation and really figuring out how to make the most of these technologies, while also ensuring that they're safe and that the journalism quality isn't affected.
So the Google thing that you're referencing is essentially when you type something up and then there's like a summary.
Yeah.
So it stops individuals from going into content because they've got the summary up front. Is that what
it's really helpful? That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's genuinely very helpful, and I use it whenever my answer comes up on Google. But it's just like, what does that mean for us?
Is there a huge dependency? I imagine so. There's a huge dependency on the traffic from Google and other search engines.
Right, yeah. I mean, people have entire teams dedicated to SEO, which is search engine optimization. It's how you get your stuff to be at the top of Google when you search, right? Mm-hmm. So if now the thing that comes up is Google's own AI summary, that kind of screws us all over, doesn't it?
Yeah. And do you have to take that into consideration when you're writing an article as well? I
think it's something, I kind of mentioned that a lot of Vogue Business's stuff is behind a paywall. I don't know, I haven't spoken to our memberships team on how that affects them, because I can imagine if you are a publication where a lot of your revenue comes from people paying to read your content, and Google is then using it as like a summary and giving it to people for free, that kind of cuts you out, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not something that I've had to deal with directly in my role as a writer, but I'm sure it will become more and more important.
So what are your predictions then on what's going to happen ahead, or what's coming up in publishing?
That's a really big question, isn't it? I think that it is really difficult to predict exactly where publishing is going and how things will come to fruition, just because if you look at technology, if you look at the pace of the industry, it's all kind of accelerating exponentially, right? So something like, even like we thought NFTs were going to be really, really big, and now they've kind of gone quiet, and like people were basing entire strategies on that, and now who knows what's happening. So I think that it is really difficult to predict right now, and I think it just ties back into the pace of the industry. It ties back into this technology piece that we've been discussing. But yeah, I don't know. What have other people said to this answer? What do you think?
What are the predictions on?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to tune into the other episodes.
There we go.
I think there's a lot that can be said about the quality of the journalism. You referenced some things there in terms of the disruption of AI. Of course, there's a whole conversation there about the changes in subscription models. I mean, it's very interesting to hear that all of your content is behind a paywall. I don't know if is some of it in front of a paywall. Do you have any of it?
It's called like a paywall decrement. So you basically get like one article per month that we've said is a non-member article, and you can read that for free. And then there are certain member articles that you have to be a member to read. And then once you've hit that one free article a month, then you have to pay either way. So it's a pretty rigorous paywall.
So I think that those models could be up for question, right? So Vogue Business, for example, may look to change that depending on whatever's going on with the competition. And I do feel like, to your earlier point, in terms of the makeup of the teams and leadership and the diversity there, that's something that I do feel, based on what I've heard from other people, could be changing as well, positively.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even to go back to your point around the paywalls, like the advertising model is also totally changing, right? Yeah. So in a way, sometimes I find myself being like, oh, I'm so annoyed that this article that I've written that I really want everyone to read is behind a paywall. But actually the reason why I can do great journalism is because it's behind a paywall, because that's how we keep the publication going. And I think that there have been a number of sort of fashion publications, mainly independent magazines, that have ended up shutting down just because the advertising model is getting really difficult for people. And to the point around diversity in leadership, I think that's something that I feel like we're not totally there yet. I think it's something that people are just becoming aware of and putting in sort of these mechanisms to get younger people in, and then slowly they work up.
You referenced Web3 earlier. What's the impact of Web3 to Vogue Business?
We mainly cover it from the perspective of what the impact is to the fashion industry, to be honest. So I think right now where we're at with Web3 is it started out as this like super flashy thing that everyone wants to be front and center around, like the metaverse and NFTs and all these, various technologies around like, digital avatars and AR and VR and all the R's. I think that now people are still using those technologies, but a little bit behind the scenes. I think that, even with AI, really, like, probably every company uses AI of some sort. It's just that generative AI is the type that's getting a lot of attention right now. The kind of AI that makes up photos and makes up words, that kind of thing. At Condé Nast, I think we're not allowed to use images that have been created by AI. I think that some publications do, but yeah, that's been a kind of a ground rule for us right now. I don't know. It could be changing in the future. And I don't know I don't know if any of my colleagues are out here writing articles with ChatGPT. Maybe this is the solution to the pace of the industry. I'm not totally sure, to be honest. But yeah, I think that there's also a lot of questions around regulations, right? Like not necessarily just for Vogue Business, but for publications more generally. I think people now have to declare when they've used AI in writing something. Is that correct? I think it is.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Which hopefully there's going to be a lot more transparency around this because, it's quite the waters are very murky right now.
Agreed. So, what about maybe you've covered this already, but what do you see as the opportunities for growth?
I think with all these challenges, there's a huge opportunity for innovation, right? Whether that's related to tech specifically or just like new business models and ways of doing things, new ways of putting together a team. I think that sometimes when you're in a really challenging moment, which I think we are, with the sort of economic crisis going on and like huge macro issues that are facing all of us, I think that kind of opens up a great opportunity to do things differently and really rebuild. So yeah, I mean, I really hope that we see a lot of great new ideas. I think that there's already a lot of smaller publications coming up right now who kind of see a magazine as more of like a community builder than it is like strictly for information, right? Like maybe they're totally digital first, and their social media is where you're getting the news updates, but then the magazine is more of like a collectible, and they kind of see their publication as an online community more so than it is just like a strict media outlet. I think that potentially might be one of the ways that publications are going, particularly sort of the newer up and coming ones.
Do you see yourself doing panel discussions in a meta environment, or maybe interviewing people in a meta environment, or has that already happened?
You know what? Vogue Business did a metaverse conference that was hosted in the metaverse. People loved it. Actually, it was super meta, obviously. But you could join as an avatar and then go to the various panel talks that had been recorded and it was in the metaverse. I think probably it's still not as like high tech as it will be one day, right? We weren't all sat there with AR like goggles. That would be great, especially because our team works between the US and the UK. So I would love to have these like AR things. But yeah, I mean, I think even, people have, used ChatGPT to, interview ChatGPT about ChatGPT, like that kind of thing. I think things are getting very meta here with all the tech. But yeah, no, I'd love to be part of more of those kinds of discussions. I think it's really fascinating. I think it's really important that publishers are involved in these discussions as various technologies develop, right? We can't just shut them out because then they're going to happen regardless of whether or not you want it. So you might as well get involved and help shape the conversation.
If we change gears of society and go back to your first few weeks at Condé Nast or at Vogue Business, how do you think it went?
You know what? I think it went pretty well. I mean, I just had that 1 month internship and there's not much you can do in 1 month. So I think that rather than taking on a bunch of tasks, I really focused my efforts on building relationships, and that really set me up well. I just had, it was a digital coffee meeting, but a coffee meeting with basically everyone that I could on the team who would let me. And I'm really lucky that people were super welcoming and excited to have an intern. I was the first intern that they'd had. And people were, really, really nice to me and gave me a lot of their time, which I was grateful for. But yeah, I think my first few weeks and month went well because I built those relationships, and it wasn't even necessarily this like Machiavellian thing where I was thinking like, oh, I need to make friends with this person and they're going to get me my internship and it's all going to work out. I think that I just naturally really got along with people and they were naturally really willing to help me, and then because of that it led to the opportunities kind of developing. But yeah, I think my biggest advice for anyone starting out in a job is to really get to know people. I think that in this whole era of, hybrid work and we're all behind screens and, like I said, the pace is going really quickly in journalism. It's really easy to kind of think, oh, well, we can just do everything online. But actually that face-to-face contact is so important. And that's really how people remember you is building that relationship in person, I think.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. The networking component, both internally and externally, is extremely important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really for me, because I kind of wanted to make myself like indispensable, and I think that the first step to that is getting people to care about you and care about your progression, and then that's just how it works. I think when I first joined, I was like, what is networking? It sounds so like scary and a bit kind of usury or like, just kind of, I didn't like the vibe of it. And I think that when I reframed it as just like making friends basically or making relationships, it really changed things for me. I think that it has to be authentic for it to work.
How do you get others to invest in your interest and your growth?
I think firstly by investing in them, right? Like be willing to do that task that nobody wants to do. Be willing to, like come prepared, right? I would come to these meetings with lists of questions that were targeted to each person about either their career path or sort of broader advice, and would kind of tailor them based on how the first few were going. I would be like, okay, clearly this person is really uncomfortable talking about their own career, so I'm just going to ask them about how they come up with ideas for their stories, for instance. Or maybe this person really loves giving advice and loves reminiscing about their first few years in publishing, so I'm really going to ask for advice on that. So really let people lead in the areas that they feel comfortable in, and then you'll get the best advice and also the best relationships, I think.
That's brilliant advice. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to wrap up with asking you, what would you like the audience to take away from this conversation?
Key takeaways. Okay, I think that probably that it's a really exciting time to come into publishing. I think, post-COVID, there's so much change going on right now, and there's a lot of opportunities to get involved and to really be part of driving that change. I think that more than ever, business leaders are listening to young voices, and it's super powerful to come in and actually not just be the intern who grabs coffee, but actually maybe your manager is asking you, hey, so what do you think about this trend related to Gen Z, or how do we reach younger audiences? So yeah, I think really the key lesson here is just that you're really valuable. People want your information, your knowledge, and your experience. So yeah, go out there and start.
Brilliant advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The award-winning Maliha.
Thank you very much.